Every morning, before the first student arrived, one man quietly unlocked this school. To everyone here, he was just the janitor. At school, her classmates never let her forget it. They teased her every chance they got. "Your dad's just the janitor," they would laugh. Even his own daughter wished nobody knew what her father did for a living. But she had no idea where he disappeared every afternoon, or why the principal suddenly stopped the biggest school assembly of the year just to call his name. Within the next few minutes, everything she believed about her father was about to change forever. At 5:15 every single morning, before the sun touched the flagpole outside Lincoln Middle School, Nathan Brooks unlocked the floored side door with a ring of keys that had worn a groove into his palm over 11 years. He was 46 years old, tall, a little stooped now from years of lifting and mopping and bending, with hazel eyes that still had warmth in them even though sleep rarely found its way into his life anymore. He flipped on the hallway lights one bank at a time, and the building woke up section by section, the way it always did, the way only he ever saw it. Nathan had been the janitor at Lincoln Middle School since Emma was 2 years old. Before that, he'd worked construction, and before that, he'd been a husband. His wife, Diane, had passed away from a sudden illness when Emma was barely old enough to remember her mother's Katen, Sedinge, and in the wreckage of that loss, Nathan had rebuilt his entire life around one single goal, making sure his daughter never felt the absence of anything. Not love, not stability, not a warm meal on the table. If that meant scrubbing gum off the undersides of 200 desks every summer, so be it. If it meant taking a second job stocking shelves at a distribution warehouse 3 nights a week, so be it. Nathan Brooks did not complain. He simply worked. By 7:45, the halls were filled with the noise of adolescence, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, laughter bouncing off cinder block walls, and Nathan disappeared into the background the way he always did, pushing his cart past clusters of 13-year-olds who barely registered he existed. That was fine by him. He wasn't there to be noticed. He was there to make sure the building he loved kept running, quietly, invisibly, like a heartbeat nobody thinks about until it stops. 13-year-old Emma Brooks moved through those same halls every day, but she moved differently than her father. She kept her head down near the west corridor, the one that connected to the maintenance closet, because that was where his cart usually sat between periods. She was smart, the smartest in her grade, according to her teachers, and kind in a way that made adults trust her instantly. But she carried something heavy behind her eyes that none of her friends could name, and that heaviness had a very specific cause: shame. It had started small, the way these things always do. A comment in 6th grade. "Isn't that your dad who cleans the bathrooms?" Followed by a ripple of laughter that Emma had tried to swallow. She'd told herself it didn't matter. But middle school has a way of magnifying every small crack until it becomes a canyon, and by 7th grade, Emma had perfected the art of changing the subject whenever anyone asked what her father did for a living. "He works at the school," she would say, vaguely, hoping the sentence would end there. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. On a Tuesday in October, it didn't. Emma was sitting with 3 girls at lunch: Priya, Sophia, and a newer girl named Chloe who was still learning the social terrain, when Chloe glanced toward the cafeteria doors and asked, too loudly, "Wait, is that guy with the mop your dad?" The table went quiet in that particular way that feels louder than noise. Emma's stomach dropped. Through the small window in the cafeteria door, she could see her father's silhouette pushing his cart past the hallway, keys jingling faintly, oblivious to the conversation happening 30 feet away about him. "Yeah," Emma said, and immediately regretted how flat her voice sounded. "Oh," Chloe said, not unkindly, just carelessly, the way 13-year-olds often are. "That's kind of funny, actually. Like he's basically at your school every single day. Does that feel weird?" Priya laughed, not cruelly, just reflexively, the way you laugh at anything mildly awkward at that age. And Emma laughed too, because it was easier than the alternative. But she didn't finish her lunch that day. She pushed her tray away, said she wasn't hungry, and spent the rest of the period staring at the clock, willing the day to end. That night, at their small 2-bedroom apartment across town, Nathan came home a little after 6. showered off the smell of industrial floor cleaner, and made spaghetti because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was spaghetti night, a tradition that had survived every hard year since Diane died. Emma sat across from him, pushing noodles around her plate, quieter than usual. "Rough day?" Nathan asked, the way he always did, watching her over his glasses. "I'm fine," Emma said. "You know you can talk to me." "I said I'm fine, Dad." Something in her tone made Nathan set his fork down. He didn't push. He'd learned over the years that Emma needed room before she needed questions. So he let it go, cleared the dishes, and later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, he changed out of his house clothes and back into a warehouse safety vest because Tuesday was also a warehouse night, and the second job didn't care whose feelings had been hurt that day. The warehouse where Nathan worked 3 nights a week was 40 minutes from their apartment, a cavernous distribution center that never fully went dark, its towering shelves lit by cold fluorescent tubes that buzzed faintly overhead. Nathan had been doing this shift for almost 4 years, ever since he quietly started taking on more than just his own bills. He lifted boxes until his shoulders screamed, drove a pallet jack until his hands cramped, and clocked out somewhere around 2 a.m. most nights, sleeping for barely 3 hours before his alarm dragged him back to the school by 5:15. He never told Emma about the warehouse job, not because it was a secret exactly, but because he didn't want her to worry, and more than that, he didn't want her to know where the extra money actually went. Because it wasn't just going to their rent, or her school supplies, or the modest savings account he kept for her future. A significant portion of it, more than Emma or almost anyone else would have guessed, went to other people's children. It had started 3 years earlier, almost by accident. Nathan had been mopping near the front office one afternoon when he overheard the school secretary on the phone, her voice hushed, explaining to a parent that their child's lunch account was severely overdrawn and the school couldn't extend credit any further. Nathan had recognized the boy's name, a quiet 6th grader named Marcus, who ate alone most days. That evening, without telling anyone, Nathan walked into the office and quietly paid off the balance himself, asking only that his name never be mentioned. It became a pattern after that. A girl named Destiny needed a winter coat and didn't have one. Nathan bought her one 2 sizes big so she'd grow into it, and left it with her homeroom teacher to distribute as a lost and found item, so no one would know where it came from. A boy on the wrestling team couldn't afford the entry fee for regionals. The fee mysteriously got covered. A freshman, whose family had lost their apartment, needed bus fare to a shelter across town for 2 months. It appeared in an envelope at the front desk, unsigned. Nathan tutored 2 struggling students in math during his lunch break, sitting with them in the empty cafeteria, never mentioning it to a soul, including his own daughter. He wasn't trying to be a hero. If you had asked him why he did it, he would have shrugged and said something like, "Someone did something like that for us once. Back when Diane was sick. I just never forgot it." He believed, quietly and completely, that this was simply what you did if you had a little more than someone else. You gave it, and you didn't make a show of it. He had no idea that the school's staff had slowly started piecing together a pattern of small, unexplained kindnesses, all orbiting around one unusually attentive janitor who somehow always seemed to know exactly which student was struggling before anyone else noticed. Principal Karen Lewis had been at Lincoln Middle School for 9 years, and in that time, she had developed a reputation for running a tight, disciplined building. She was 52, sharp-eyed behind her thin-framed glasses, with silver streaks threading through her auburn hair, and she did not, as a rule, get sentimental about staff. But over the past 2 years, she had begun keeping a small folder in her desk drawer, filled with strange little notes. A thank you card from a parent she couldn't place, a comment from a teacher about a mysteriously paid lunch account, a hallway rumor about a janitor who tutored kids during his break. She hadn't put it all together yet, but something had started nagging at her, a sense that there was more happening inside her school's walls than she fully understood. That November, the district office sent out a memo announcing a new initiative. Each school in the district would host an assembly to recognize one most inspiring parent, nominated by staff and students as part of a broader campaign to celebrate the often overlooked adults who supported children through hardship. Karen groaned inwardly at first. It felt like one more box to check in an already overstuffed calendar. But she sent out the nomination form to her staff anyway, mostly out of obligation. What she got back astonished her. Within a week, 7 different staff members had independently mentioned Nathan Brooks. Not because he had a child at the school, which was actually somewhat unusual since Emma technically attended, but because of what teachers had witnessed him quietly doing for other students. The wrestling coach mentioned the regionals fee. The front office secretary mentioned 3 different lunch accounts that had been mysteriously settled over the years, always around the time Nathan happened to be nearby. A math teacher mentioned that 2 of her most at-risk students had turned their grades around after study sessions that, upon closer inspection, always seemed to happen in the cafeteria during Nathan's lunch break. Destiny's homeroom teacher remembered the coat that had shown up 2 winters ago, and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Destiny still wore it. Karen sat at her desk after school one evening with all 7 notes spread out in front of her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something crack open in her chest. She had walked past this man in the hallway probably 10,000 times. She had signed his timesheets. She had, if she was honest with herself, barely looked at him as anything more than part of the building's infrastructure, as reliable and unremarkable as the boiler room or the fire alarms. And this whole time, he had been quietly holding up children that the system itself was failing. She made some calls. She talked to Marcus's mother, who broke down crying on the phone when she realized someone finally knew what had happened 3 years earlier. She talked to the wrestling coach in more detail. She even, carefully and discreetly, asked Emma's homeroom teacher what she knew about the Brooks family, learning for the first time that Nathan was raising Emma alone, that Diane had passed away years ago, and that money was almost certainly tighter than anyone realized. By the time Karen finished gathering everything, she no longer had any doubt about who Lincoln Middle School's most inspiring parent would be. The only question left was how to make sure Nathan Brooks didn't find a way to quietly refuse the honor, the way she suspected he absolutely would try to. Meanwhile, Emma's own quiet unraveling continued. The comment from Chloe had planted something that grew over the following weeks, watered by a handful of similar remarks. Nothing cruel, nothing that would show up on any bullying report, just the low-grade friction of middle schoolers noticing things and saying them out loud without thinking. Emma began taking the long way around the west corridor to avoid walking past her father's cart during passing periods. She stopped mentioning him at all when friends asked about her family, deflecting with vague half-answers. And one evening in late November, the tension finally broke. Nathan had picked her up from a friend's house, still in his work uniform because he'd come straight from a shift, his name patch visible on his chest. As they walked to the car, one of Emma's classmates called out a cheerful, "Bye, Emma," from across the parking lot, and glanced curiously at Nathan's uniform. Emma mumbled a goodbye and practically shoved her father toward the car. "Can you wait in the car next time?" she said, once they were both inside, her voice tight. "Or wear something else. Anything else." Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice stayed even. "Something wrong with what I wear to work, kiddo?" "It's just..." Emma stared out the window, cheeks burning. "Everyone knows now. Everyone knows you're the janitor, and they think it's funny, or weird, or, I don't know, Dad. I just don't want to talk about it." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Nathan didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply drove for another block, before speaking again, quietly. "I'm not ashamed of what I do, Emma. I clean floors and I fix broken chairs, so 300 kids have a safe place to learn every day. That's honest work. I need you to understand that." "I know," Emma said, and she did know it, somewhere underneath the shame. But knowing it and feeling it were 2 very different things at 13. "I just wish it wasn't so obvious." Nathan didn't answer that. He couldn't. Not without either lying to make her feel better, or saying something that would end some many, so neither of them wanted to name. He drove the rest of the way home in silence. And that night, After Emma had gone to her room, he sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at nothing, wondering, not for the first time, if he was failing her in ways he couldn't to fix by working harder. He almost quit the second job that week, thinking that maybe if he could pick Emma up in nicer clothes, if he had time to rest, if he seemed a little less like a man perpetually tired from carrying two jobs, some of this might ease. But then he thought of Marcus, and Destiny, and the two kids he tutored during lunch, and the wrestling boy who'd placed third at regionals in a match Nathan had watched from the back row without ever telling him he was the reason he'd made it there at all. He couldn't quit. He just couldn't. So he kept going, the way he always had, quietly absorbing the cost so someone else wouldn't have to. The assembly was scheduled for the second Friday of December, right before winter break, and the school buzzed with a low current of curiosity in the days leading up to it. Word had gotten out that Lincoln Middle School would be announcing its first ever, most inspiring parent, and speculation ran through the student body the way it always does. Some students guessed it would be a PTA mom who organized bake sales, others guessed a dad who coached the youth soccer league. Nobody guessed Nathan Brooks, mostly because almost nobody knew him well enough to guess anything about him at all. Karen Lewis had made exactly one phone call that mattered most, to Nathan himself, 2 days before the assembly, asking him to stop by her office after his shift. Nathan had assumed, with a small knot of anxiety in his stomach, that he was in some kind of trouble. A supply order gone wrong, a complaint from a teacher, something. Instead, Karen had sat him down and told him, as gently and directly as she could, that the staff and students of Lincoln Middle School had nominated him for the Most Inspiring Parent Award, and that she wanted him to be there, in the gymnasium, on Friday. Nathan's reaction was immediate and firm. "No," he said, shaking his head, already standing to leave. "No, I appreciate it, Mrs. Lewis. I really do. But I don't do this stuff I don't want people making a fuss. Please, just give it to somebody else." "Nathan," Karen said, and something in her voice made him stop at the door. "I know about Marcus's lunch account. I know about Destiny's coat. I know about the study sessions in the cafeteria, and I know about the wrestling fee. I've talked to 3 different families this week who cried on the phone with me because someone finally noticed what you did for them." She let that sit for a moment. "You don't have to say anything on that stage if you don't want to, but you are going to be there, because there are 7 staff members and at least 4 families who asked me, personally, to make sure you knew you were seen. Let them have that. Please." Nathan stood in the doorway for a long moment, jaw tight, unable to find words. Finally, he nodded once, stiffly, and left without another word, walking the halls that night with his mop and bucket feeling strangely exposed, as though the walls themselves now knew something about him he'd spent years trying to keep hidden. He didn't tell Emma. He didn't know how. What would he even say? "The school is giving me an award for secretly paying other kids' lunch bills and buying them coats." It felt to him like showing off, like undoing the whole point of doing it quietly in the first place. So Friday morning, he went to work the way he always did, in his same faded navy uniform, keys jingling on his belt, planning to slip into the gymnasium at the back and disappear the moment it was over. Emma, for her part, walked into the assembly that morning with the same low, simmering dread she always carried about her father in public spaces, though she had no idea what was actually about to happen. She sat with her class in the bleachers, halfway up, scanning the gym floor out of habit for any sign of her dad's cart, relieved when she didn't see it, meaning she assumed that he was safely tucked away somewhere doing his job, invisible, the way she'd unconsciously trained herself to want him to be. Principal Lewis walked to the podium at 9:40 a.m., the gymnasium settling into the particular hush that overtakes 400 restless students only when something genuinely unusual is about to happen. She thanked everyone for their patience with the new district initiative, spoke briefly about the meaning behind the Most Inspiring Parent recognition, and then paused, glancing down at her index card for longer than necessary. "This year," she said, her voice steady but warmer than her usual clipped tone, "the nomination for this award didn't come from one person. It came from 7 different staff members, completely independently of each other, all describing things I didn't know were happening in this building. She looked up. I want to read you a few of them before I say the name, because I think the name alone won't mean anything until you understand the whole picture. She read Marcus's story first, without using his name, describing a student whose lunch debt had quietly vanished 3 years ago and was never spoken of again, until his mother learned this month who had paid it. A ripple of murmurs went through the bleachers. She described a girl who received a warm winter coat 2 years ago, left anonymously with a note that only said, "In case you need it," a coat that girl still wore every winter since. She described 2 students who'd failed math at the start of 7th grade and now carried B averages, thanks to quiet lunchtime tutoring sessions no one had ever announced. She described a wrestler who's made it to regionals only because his entry fee mysteriously appeared paid in full. Emma sat very still in the bleachers, an odd feeling gathering in her chest, though she couldn't yet name why these stories felt strangely, uncomfortably familiar. All of these things, Karen continued, were done by the same person, quietly, without ever asking for a single word of thanks. For years, she paused, and the gymnasium had gone completely silent now. 400 kids leaning forward without realizing it. Our first ever most inspiring parent at Lincoln Middle School is Nathan Brooks. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Then, from the back of the gym near the double doors, a ripple of recognition spread through the crowd as heads turned toward the man standing near the wall in a faded navy uniform, keys clipped to his belt, looking as though he very much wished the floor would open beneath him. Emma's whole body went cold, then hot, then something she had no name for. She turned in her seat, staring at her father across the gymnasium, and for one disorienting moment, all she could think about was every time she had asked him to wait in the car, every time she had changed the subject, every time she had felt that hot flush of embarrassment walking past his cart in the hallway. A teacher near the podium, Marcus's math teacher, stood up first, clapping, then another, then the wrestling coach, then the front office secretary wiping her eyes, then row after row of students who didn't fully understand the details, but understood enough that the quiet man who mopped their hallways every morning had spent years secretly making sure other kids didn't go hungry, didn't go cold, didn't fall through the cracks that swallow so many children whole. The applause built like a wave, students rising to their feet across the bleachers, first in scattered clusters, and then in a single, unbroken surge, until the entire gymnasium was standing. 400 kids and 30 staff members on their feet, applause thundering off the walls Nathan had painted himself 2 summers ago. Nathan stood frozen near the back wall, face flushed, hands trembling slightly at his sides, utterly unprepared for the sound crashing over him. He had spent years perfecting the art of being unseen, and now he was the single most visible person in the entire building, and it was almost unbearable. Except that somewhere in the wave of noise, he heard his name being called, not by the principal, but by a voice cutting through the bleachers. "Dad!" Emma pushed past 2 classmates, stumbled down the bleacher steps, and ran across the gymnasium floor toward him, tears streaming freely down her face. All the careful walls she'd built over the past 2 years collapsing at once. She reached him and threw her arms around his waist, burying her face against his uniform, the same uniform she'd once asked him to hide. "I'm so sorry," she said into his chest, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't know. I didn't know any of it." Nathan wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes finally giving way, years of quiet exhaustion and quiet giving finally cracking, open into something he let himself feel in front of 400 people. "You don't have to be sorry," he murmured into her hair. "You never had to be sorry." The applause kept going, swelling louder as students realized what they were witnessing. Not just an award, but a daughter finally seeing her father clearly for the first time. Principal Lewis, watching from the podium with her own eyes glistening, let the moment breathe far longer than protocol probably allowed, because some moments are worth more than a schedule. In the weeks that followed, something had shifted at Lincoln Middle School, subtly but unmistakably. Students who had never spoken to Nathan before started saying good morning to him in the halls, Chloe, the girl whose careless comment had planted the first seed of Emma's shame, found Emma at lunch one day and, with the clumsy sincerity only a 13-year-old can manage, told her that her dad was actually the coolest person at this school, which made Emma laugh for the first time in weeks. Marcus's mother stopped by the school in person to shake Nathan's hand, unable to get through more than a sentence without crying. The wrestling team voted, unanimously and without any prompting from the coach, to award Nathan an honorary team jacket, which he wore exactly once, awkwardly, before hanging it carefully in his closet at home. Nathan didn't change much about how he worked. He still arrived at 5:15 every morning. He still worked his warehouse shifts 3 nights a week, though Karen quietly arranged for a small stipend increase that made those shifts slightly less necessary. He still helped quietly where he could, though it was harder now to stay anonymous, given that half the school knew his name. But something had changed in how Emma walked through those same hallways. She no longer took the long way around the west corridor. She started stopping by her father's cart between classes, just for a minute, just to say hi, and she stopped lowering her voice when someone asked what her dad did for a living. "He works at my school," she told a new student in January, when the question came up the way it always eventually did. "He's the janitor. And also kind of a legend, honestly." Years later, when Emma was in college, she would tell this story to her roommates on nights when the conversation turned toward family, toward the people who shaped them without ever asking for recognition. She would tell them about the assembly, about the standing ovation, about running across that gymnasium floor with tears she couldn't stop, and about the quiet, steady man who had spent years making sure other people's children never went without, all while carrying the weight of raising his own daughter alone. She would tell them that the lesson she carried out of that gymnasium wasn't really about janitors or jobs or what people assume about each other based on a uniform. It was simpler than that, and it took her 13 years and one unforgettable Friday morning to understand it fully, that the people who give the most are so often the ones asking for the least, and that the truest measure of a person was never the title on their name tag, but the quiet, unglamorous, invisible ways they showed up for other people when nobody was watching at all. Nathan Brooks never asked to be seen, but on that Friday in December, an entire school stood up and saw him anyway, and his daughter, finally, saw him clearest of all.